It was 2018 evening. In a bustling city filled with power, wealth, and ambition, it's easy to forget the people who often go unnoticed, the ones who are struggling, surviving on the edges of society. But what happens when someone who's used to being in control, someone who's been at the top of the world, suddenly finds themselves face to face with the consequences of their own actions? That's exactly what happened when President Donald Trump laughed at a homeless man, only to freeze in shock when he realized who the man truly was. The story begins on a typical sunny afternoon in the heart of New York City. President Trump, surrounded by his usual entourage, steps out of a high-end restaurant, the kind where the elite dine and celebrities gather. He's dressed in his signature suit, his confident stride, a reflection of the power he's accumulated over the years. As he steps onto the sidewalk, he spots an older man sitting alone on a street corner. The man, unshaven and wearing tattered clothes, appears to be another unfortunate soul in a city full of them. Trump, never one to shy away from making a comment, smirks and mutters something sarcastic under his breath. The people around him laugh, and for a moment, the homeless man becomes the punchline of a cruel joke. But what Trump doesn't know is that this encounter will change everything for him. As he continues to walk past, still chuckling, the homeless man slowly looks up, his eyes locking with Trump's. In that moment, there's a shift, a strange, almost unsettling silence that falls over the crowd. The older man doesn't respond with anger or resentment. Instead, he simply says one line that stops everyone in their tracks. "I've seen the highest of highs, Mr. Trump, and I've seen the lowest of lows." It's a statement that seems to carry far more weight than a simple remark. Trump, now slightly uneasy, turns to give the man another glance. But just as the words start to settle in, a voice behind him calls out, "Do you remember who I am?" Trump freezes. His expression shifts from amusement to confusion. The air around them seems to tighten as the crowd grows silent, waiting for his response. The homeless man's calm, yet piercing gaze is enough to make anyone question what's really happening. There's something familiar about him, something that makes Trump pause for just a moment too long. Could it be? Is this man someone Trump knew from his past, someone he once crossed paths with in his rise to fame and fortune? The tension builds as the realization hits him. He's about to learn something that could change the way he sees the world. But just before he can speak, the homeless man steps back into the shadows of the city, leaving Trump standing there, speechless and unsure. Who is this man? What's the truth behind their connection? And why does Trump feel so unsettled by this seemingly chance encounter? Stay tuned, because the shocking revelation is coming next, and it might just leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the powerful figures in this world. As President Trump stood there, frozen in the middle of the bustling city street, his mind raced. The words the homeless man had spoken echoed in his ears. "I've seen the highest of highs, Mr. Trump, and I've seen the lowest of lows." The casual remark, spoken with such certainty, rattled him. He scanned the crowd, but the man was already gone, swallowed up by the noise and movement of the city. A chill ran down Trump's spine as his mind tried to piece together the puzzle. Who was this man? How could someone like him, a man who had once built an empire from the ground up, be connected to someone like that? Trump had seen a lot of people in his life, successful business tycoons, celebrities, even political figures. But there was something about this encounter that felt different. It wasn't just about the humiliation of being mocked in front of others. It was deeper than that, more unsettling. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd met this man before. For a moment, Trump stood there, staring into the empty space where the homeless man had been. His mind wandered back to his early years in business. He thought about the people who had crossed his path, the ones he had brushed aside, the ones who had been part of his rise to power, and those he had left behind. Could it be that one of them was standing before him in the form of this homeless man? But no, that didn't make sense. The faces from his past didn't match the man in front of him. The man wasn't old enough, or at least he didn't appear to be. Yet something about his calm demeanor, the steady look in his eyes, suggested he knew far more than he was letting on. Trump's entourage had now gathered around him, sensing his shift in mood. They whispered to each other, unsure of what had just occurred. But Trump wasn't paying attention. His thoughts were racing. He needed to find out more. This wasn't just some random encounter. There was history between him and this man, whether he could remember it or not. He turned abruptly, signaling to one of his assistants. "Find out who that man was. I want answers," he demanded, his voice more stern than usual. His assistant, startled by the urgency in his tone, nodded and hurried off, disappearing into the crowd. As the minutes ticked by, Trump stood alone, pacing back and forth. The noise of the city seemed distant now, almost muffled, as he became consumed by the mystery. Was it possible that this homeless man had once been someone important in his life? Maybe someone he had wronged, someone he had crossed without realizing the consequences. Or was it something more? Was it fate, some cruel twist of irony, reminding him that no one is immune to the highs and lows of life? The seconds felt like hours, but still, there was no word, no information. The mystery deepened. Trump's mind raced with questions that would only continue to gnaw at him until the truth was revealed. But what if he wasn't ready for the answer? What if uncovering the man's identity would force him to confront something he wasn't prepared to face? Only time would tell. As Trump continued to pace, 1,000 thoughts collided in his mind. Was the homeless man really someone from his past, or was this just a bizarre coincidence? His instincts told him that there was something more to this encounter, something that couldn't be brushed off as just another strange moment in his busy life. The fact that the man spoke with such confidence and familiarity shook him, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of his own past bearing down on him. For years, Trump had carefully cultivated his public persona, successful, powerful, unshakable. But as he stood there, in the middle of the street, surrounded by people who had no idea of the turmoil brewing inside him, the facade began to crack. His mind wandered back to the decisions he had made, the people he had dismissed or left behind on his rise to the top. Could this man be one of those people? Someone who had once been part of his life, but whose memory he had long since erased. What if he had wronged him in some way? The thought was unsettling. Meanwhile, Trump's assistant had returned, her face tense as she relayed the news. "Sir, we couldn't find anything on him." "Not yet," she said, "but we're looking into it." Trump's frustration grew. He couldn't wait any longer. Something about this encounter felt like a trap, like he was being lured into something far bigger than he could have imagined. But what? The scene played over and over in his mind. The way the homeless man had spoken, the way he had looked him in the eye with an almost knowing gaze. It was as if the man had been waiting for this moment, for Trump to finally notice him. But why now? What did he want from him? And more importantly, who was he really? Every moment spent in this uncertainty only deepened the mystery, and Trump realized he was no longer just trying to solve a puzzle. He was caught in a web he didn't understand, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever anticipated. The answers might not be what he expected, and the consequences could be far more personal than he could ever prepare for. Trump stood frozen, his thoughts racing. Every instinct told him that something big was about to happen, but the weight of the moment made it hard to breathe. The homeless man still sat on the ground, his eyes locked onto Trump's, as if daring him to make the next move. The crowd around them had grown, but it felt like time had slowed, the noise of the city muffled as the tension between them simmered. His assistant's voice snapped him back to reality. "Sir, we found something. It's odd. We're still confirming, but there might be more to this than we thought." She handed him her phone, the screen showing a vague news article from years ago. Trump skimmed the words, feeling his pulse quicken. It was a story about a man who had been a rising star in business, someone who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances after a scandal. The man in the article had once been close to Trump, a business partner he had trusted. The connection struck Trump like a lightning bolt, and for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Had this man been the one he had betrayed years ago, the one whose downfall had propelled Trump higher? And now, here he was, standing before him in the most unlikely of places. Was this some twisted form of revenge? His mind raced, trying to piece together the details, but the more he thought, the more questions piled up. Why had the man chosen now to confront him? What was his goal? Revenge, redemption, or something else entirely? Trump felt a cold sweat form on his brow as he turned back toward the homeless man. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made Trump hesitate. What if this was the moment that everything changed? What if the man's presence here wasn't just a coincidence, but a reckoning? The air was thick with anticipation, and Trump knew that what happened next could determine the rest of his life. Trump's heart raced as the thought of his past betrayal hit him harder than he expected. Could it really be him? The man who had once been his ally, now sitting here, a shell of the person he once was, waiting for some kind of justice? The crowd around them seemed to notice the change in the air, the once loud street now eerily silent. The tension was palpable, thick as smoke, as everyone seemed to hold their breath, watching the standoff unfold. Just as Trump was about to speak, the homeless man stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, almost calculated. His ragged clothes seemed to hang loosely on his frame, but there was an undeniable air of authority in the way he held himself. A chill ran down Trump's spine. The man stepped forward, his eyes still locked onto Trump's. "You don't remember me, do you?" The man's voice was rough but steady, like a storm waiting to break. Trump took a step back, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against him. "Who are you?" His words came out sharp, more defensive than curious. He tried to brush off the feeling that something larger was at play. The man's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Maybe you've forgotten, but I haven't forgotten you, Donald." He reached into his tattered jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered photograph. It was an old image, a younger version of Trump shaking hands with the man, a deal being struck, an alliance that had once seemed so promising. Trump felt a rush of recognition. The man was Martin, his former business partner, the one who had vanished after the scandal. The same scandal that had nearly destroyed Trump's reputation years ago, but which he had survived, emerging unscathed and more powerful than ever. You should be dead," Trump whispered, his voice trembling as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Martin's smile didn't falter. "Dead? No, but what happened to me, I would have rather been." He paused, looking around the growing crowd. "You took everything from me, Donald, and now you're going to pay for it." Trump's pulse quickened as he realized this wasn't just about money or power. This was personal, and Martin wasn't the only one in the crowd who remembered the past. Trump suddenly noticed a few familiar faces in the growing crowd, people he had wronged, forgotten, or even dismissed. Each one had a different story, a different piece of the puzzle. The stakes had just escalated. Martin wasn't alone in his revenge, and the past was coming back to haunt Trump in ways he had never imagined. What had started as a chance encounter with a homeless man now felt like the beginning of something much bigger, something he couldn't control. The clock was ticking, and Trump had no idea what move he would have to make to survive this confrontation. Trump's mind raced as he tried to process the enormity of the situation. Martin, the man he had left behind all those years ago, wasn't just some homeless vagabond seeking revenge. He was a symbol, a living reminder of the ruthless game Trump had played, a game that had cost people far more than money. Martin had seen it all. He knew the dirty secrets, the backroom deals, and the broken promises. The crowd had grown larger now, whispers spreading through the people who had gathered. Trump could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to do something, to say something, but he was paralyzed. The weight of his past mistakes pressed down on him like a vice. You don't understand, Martin. It was business," Trump stammered, his voice unsteady for the first time in a long while. Martin didn't flinch. He simply stepped closer, the photograph still in his hand, now trembling slightly. "Business? Is that what you call destroying lives? Taking everything I had and leaving me to rot? This isn't business, Donald. This is personal." For a moment, Trump thought he saw something in Martin's eyes, something beyond anger. Pain. Deep, seething pain that had festered for years. But before Trump could respond, the unexpected happened. A woman, young and fiercely determined, stepped forward from the crowd. She was dressed simply, but with purpose, her eyes locked on Martin. She didn't speak at first, but when she did, her voice was calm, yet piercing. "Martin, stop." The crowd gasped, and even Trump's heart skipped a beat. The woman wasn't anyone he recognized, but Martin's reaction said it all. He froze, his expression going blank for a moment before something like realization washed over him. "Lily?" Martin's voice cracked. Lily stepped closer, standing right in front of him now. "You've been living in the shadows of your past for too long, Martin. It's time to let it go." Trump's mind reeled. Lily? Who was this woman? What was happening? Lily looked back at Trump. "You've been a part of this story for too long, Donald. It's time for you both to face the consequences of what you've done." The silence was deafening, and then, as if the weight of it all had become too much to bear, Lily handed Martin a letter. Martin looked at it for a long time before crumbling it up in his fist. Suddenly, everything seemed to shift. Martin didn't seem to be looking for revenge anymore. He wasn't out for blood. He was looking for closure, for forgiveness. In that moment, Trump realized something. All of this, his power, his wealth, his empire, meant nothing if it was built on lies and broken promises. And Martin wasn't the only one who had been hurt by his actions. The final twist came when Lily turned to Trump one last time, her eyes filled with fire. "You're next." And just like that, Trump was left with a choice: face his past or lose everything he had worked for. What would he do? Would he fight back, or would he finally be forced to reckon with the consequences of his actions? The crowd waited, the tension too thick to cut. Trump stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, staring at Lily and Martin. For the first time in his life, he was truly vulnerable, exposed for all his faults, failures, and the things he had ignored for so long. Lily's words echoed in his mind, her challenge clear: "You're next." The crowd seemed to hold its breath as Trump processed the weight of the moment. He had spent his entire career building walls, literal and metaphorical, to protect himself from the truth. But now, there was no escape. He couldn't run from the consequences anymore. The world had shifted beneath his feet, and the reality of his own choices hit him harder than anything ever had before. Martin, still clutching the crumpled letter, was no longer the angry man Trump had once known. The fire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced with something more complex, resignation perhaps, but also a quiet understanding. He glanced at Trump one last time, then at Lily. His hands, once clenched in fury, slowly opened, as if releasing all the pent-up bitterness he'd carried for so long. Lily stepped forward, placing a hand on Martin's shoulder. "It's over now," she said softly. Her voice was full of resolve, but also a quiet kind of peace. "You don't need to carry this burden anymore." Trump couldn't help but feel a sting of regret. He had hurt so many people on his rise to the top, believing that success was worth any price. But now, standing in front of these two, he realized that all the money, all the fame, meant nothing when weighed against the cost of human dignity. For the first time in a long while, Trump felt small. The towering figure of power that he once believed was invincible now seemed fragile, vulnerable, and even human. The realization was sobering. Lily turned to him one last time, her eyes unwavering. "We all have to face the consequences, Donald. You've hurt people. Now it's time to make it right." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Trump stood there, contemplating the truth of those words. He had spent his life making decisions based on what was best for him, but he realized now that it was time to rebuild, to atone for his mistakes. There was no more hiding, no more excuses. The story of Martin, Lily, and Trump had come full circle. What had begun with anger and bitterness had transformed into an opportunity for redemption, for all of them. It was a powerful reminder that no matter how high you climb, you're never too far removed from the impact you have on others. And in the end, the most important thing you can do is face your mistakes, learn from them, and try to make amends before it's too late. For Trump, the journey was only just beginning, but for the first time, he was ready to take the next step.